The unseen threat. The galaxy was calm, but it was a calm like the silence before a storm. The vast empires of alien species controlled the stars, each one confident in their superiority. They had ruled for centuries, and no one dared to challenge their power. But out there, far beyond their reach, something unknown stirred. No one knew much about the Deathworlders. They were a mysterious race, said to come from a planet where survival was a constant battle, a world so dangerous that only the strongest could survive. Yet, even though the Deathworlders had lived in isolation for as long as anyone could remember, rumors of their terrifying power spread like wildfire. Some said they had technology far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Others whispered that they could destroy entire fleets with a single strike. The galaxy had always been content to let the Deathworlders remain hidden. They were a strange, feared species living in a corner of the universe that no one cared to explore. There was no reason to engage with them, not when there were more pressing matters at hand, like the growing threat of the Xathar Empire or the power struggles among the Orokians. But everything changed when an unknown signal was intercepted. It was weak at first, almost unnoticeable, but it grew stronger with each passing moment. A call for help, and SOS from a distant part of the galaxy. It was a cry from a planet that was under attack by an unknown enemy. No one knew who was behind the assault, but the message was clear. We need help. We can't hold out much longer. The message echoed across the galaxy, and panic began to spread. The Council of Galactic Leaders gathered, their faces grim. They had heard of the Deathworlders, of course, but no one had ever expected them to be part of the galaxy's problems. After all, they had kept to themselves for so long. Why would they suddenly get involved? The leaders debated what to do. Some argued that the galaxy needed to offer help immediately, that the unknown threat must be dealt with swiftly. Others believed that the Deathworlders should be left alone, that their isolation was best for everyone. But no one could deny that the SOS had shaken them. It was an emergency, a situation they couldn't ignore. The tension grew. As the days passed, the message continued to play on repeat across the galaxy. We need help. We can't hold out much longer. The galaxy's leaders knew that if they didn't act soon, it could mean the end for the planet in question. But who could they turn to? Then, just when it seemed like there were no answers, the unexpected happened. A fleet appeared. It wasn't like anything the galaxy had ever seen before. The ships were massive, their shapes unlike anything that had been designed by any known species. They were sleek, dark, and intimidating. As the fleet made its way across the stars, it didn't announce its presence with a blast of sound or a flashy display of light. No, it was quiet, unnervingly quiet. It simply appeared, like shadows in the void. For a moment, there was confusion. The galaxy's leaders scrambled to understand who had sent these ships. Had the Deathworlders finally come out of hiding? Or was this the unknown enemy that had sent the SOS in the first place? The tension in the galaxy reached a boiling point. Then the ships broadcasted their message. We are the Deathworlders. We have come to answer the call. A chill ran through every leader in the galaxy. The Deathworlders. The rumors had been true. They were real. And they were here. The news spread like wildfire. The galaxy had always feared the Deathworlders, but now they had no choice but to confront them. Some of the alien species in the galaxy were still in disbelief, but many knew that this wasn't just a normal fleet. This wasn't a call for peace. This was a challenge. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was about to face a threat it couldn't control, and it was coming from the most unexpected of places, the Deathworlders. The leaders of the galaxy watched in stunned silence as the fleet drew closer. What would happen when the Deathworlders arrived? No one knew, but one thing was certain. The galaxy would never be the same again. As the fleet neared its destination, whispers filled the council chambers. Could the galaxy survive a confrontation with the Deathworlders? What power did they hold? And why had they answered the call for help? The only thing the leaders of the galaxy could do was wait and prepare for what was to come. What they didn't know was that the galaxy was on the verge of a confrontation that would change everything. The Deathworlders were not coming to help. They were coming to prove something. And when they did, no one would ever forget it. The unveiling. The moment the Deathworlder fleet appeared on the galaxy's radar, it was clear this was no ordinary arrival. The ships moved with a deadly precision, their formation impeccable as they approached the troubled planet. For the galaxy's leaders, it was as if time itself had slowed. The unknown fleet was a living, breathing entity that hung in the air like a dark storm cloud, silent, unyielding, and full of untapped power. In the command chambers of the Galactic Council, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The leaders of the various races, once confident in their dominance over the galaxy, now found themselves at a crossroads. The Deathworlders had never shown themselves before. And now, they were here with an ominous purpose. The question on everyone's mind was simple. What did they want? There was no denying the power of the fleet. Each ship was massive, far larger than anything the Council had ever seen. Its sleek, black exterior reflected no light, and their forms were unlike anything the galaxy's best engineers could have conceived. The design was minimalist, yet terrifying. Sharp angles, imposing size, and no visible weapons. It was a ship built to strike fear into the hearts of any enemy, yet the Deathworlders had never been seen in combat. What did this mean for the future? The Council's representative, a veteran of countless intergalactic wars, stood at the front, his hands gripping the podium. He knew this could be the turning point for everything. There were no protocols in place for this, no established rules for interacting with a race as secretive and unpredictable as the Deathworlders. Still, the galaxy's safety had to come first. "The Deathworlders are here," he said, his voice unsteady despite his years of experience. "Their fleet is not here by accident. We cannot afford to ignore them. We need to figure out what their purpose is before it's too late." As the words left his lips, a signal came through from the mysterious fleet. A simple message, nothing complicated, no threats, just a direct, blunt statement. It sent a ripple of shock through the entire chamber. "We have come to decide the galaxy's fate. Stand aside, or face the consequences." The room went silent. The message was not a plea for help. It wasn't a call for diplomacy. The Deathworlders were asserting their dominance from the very beginning. Their arrival wasn't a peaceful one. It was a declaration. Across the galaxy, the message was received with the same level of shock and fear. The various factions and species that had once controlled the galaxy now found themselves questioning everything. Were the Deathworlders here to conquer, to enslave, or was there a deeper, more dangerous agenda behind their arrival? Meanwhile, the fleet's ships didn't take a single action. They hovered, waiting, silent and menacing. Across the galaxy, speculation ran wild. Some claimed that the Deathworlders were testing the galaxy's defenses, while others believed they were here to judge the various species for their past transgressions. Some even whispered that the Deathworlders had an alliance with the galaxy's most powerful enemies, the Sathar Empire, whose massive fleets had decimated countless civilizations. Others still feared that the Deathworlders were here to wipe the galaxy clean of its inhabitants, their sudden appearance a prelude to a larger, more catastrophic event. But one thing was certain: the Deathworlders weren't here to talk. The galaxy had been forced into a dangerous game of uncertainty. The galaxy's leaders were left scrambling for a plan, but no one had the answers. The Deathworlders were a mystery, and their next move was anyone's guess. The quiet intensity of the Deathworlders' fleet sent waves of panic and confusion throughout the galaxy. On every major world, from the shining capital cities of the Orokian Empire to the distant, peaceful home planets of the Felran people, the news spread like wildfire. The galaxy's once mighty empires, who had thought themselves untouchable, now found themselves facing a species whose power was utterly unknown. This was no longer a time of simple political maneuvering. It was a time of survival. And as the days passed, everyone felt the heavy weight of impending doom. The Deathworlders' ships did not advance any further, and yet their presence loomed over every planet. It was as though they were waiting for something, or perhaps someone. Meanwhile, the mysterious fleet remained silent. They didn't speak, they didn't show any visible signs of aggression, but they didn't leave either. The galaxy was on edge. In the Galactic Council's war room, tensions reached their peak. The representatives from the various factions began to argue among themselves. The peaceful, diplomatic voices insisted that a calm approach was the best course of action. But the more war-hardened members were beginning to fear the worst. If the Deathworlders could destroy the galaxy so effortlessly, why hadn't they done so already? What were they waiting for? "We can't sit here and do nothing," said one of the older generals, her voice rising with urgency. "The Deathworlders are clearly here for a reason, and we need to find out what that is before it's too late." But as much as the galaxy's leaders wanted to act, they were paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. The unknown was the most dangerous enemy of all. At the same time, far from the council chambers, on the home planet of the Deathworlders, things were stirring. Their mysterious leaders, unseen by the rest of the galaxy, were preparing for a confrontation the galaxy was not ready for. The Deathworlders had waited for this moment for centuries, and now, the time had come to make their move. What the galaxy didn't know was that they had just awoken a force far more powerful than they could ever imagine, and the battle for the galaxy's future was about to begin. The galaxies tremble. The galaxy's leaders were still reeling from the shock of the Deathworlders' sudden appearance, their fleet hovering ominously just beyond the borders of known space. Every moment that passed felt like an eternity, filled with an eerie silence that was only broken by the rising hum of dread in every council chamber, command center, and war room. The message from the Deathworlders had been simple, but its meaning was far from clear. "We have come to decide the galaxy's fate, stand aside, or face the consequences." It wasn't a threat, not directly. Yet, it was unmistakably a warning. No one knew what the Deathworlders were capable of, and the galaxy had no choice but to prepare for the worst. For years, rumors had circulated about a mysterious and terrifying race from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Deathworlders, survivors of some of the most hostile planets known to exist, and now they had revealed themselves to the galaxy. In the Galactic Council's headquarters, representatives from dozens of species met in an emergency summit. The usually bustling halls now felt like a cold, claustrophobic trap. The discussions were loud and frantic, as delegates from every corner of the galaxy fought to make their voices heard. "We cannot back down. We cannot show weakness," a towering Tylithian warlord bellowed. His scales were a deep crimson, and his eyes burned with an intensity matched only by the galaxy's greatest warriors. "The Deathworlders want us to kneel before them. We will not." "But we don't know what they want," a calm voice from the Diplomatic Union countered. A slender, silver-skinned Isaki representative stepped forward, his antennae twitching nervously. The message was cryptic. "They're not attacking. They're simply watching us. We can't make a move until we understand their intentions." "We've never faced a threat like this before," said an elder from the Valkyrie, a race of ancient and wise beings known for their keen intellect. His frail frame contrasted with the power of his words. "We've always relied on diplomacy and military strength to navigate through difficult situations, but we don't know if diplomacy will work here. The Deathworlders could be more advanced than we can comprehend." The room fell silent for a moment, as the weight of his words settled in. They were facing an unknown force, a species that had never been seen in battle but whose power was felt like a suffocating cloud over the galaxy. The idea of negotiating or even standing their ground seemed increasingly futile as the realization hit. There was no telling what the Deathworlders were capable of. Meanwhile, the rest of the galaxy continued to buzz with rumors and fear. On the distant planet of Melnar 7, an unassuming mining colony, the message from the Deathworlders was transmitted across every screen and broadcast station. The inhabitants of the planet, once secure in their mundane lives, now found themselves caught in the crossfire of a galactic storm. Some feared the worst, that the Deathworlders would obliterate everything in their path, leaving nothing but dust and ashes. Others, however, were not as afraid. For some, the arrival of the Deathworlders was seen as a potential savior. For centuries, the galaxy had been embroiled in constant war, with factions fighting over resources and power. Some speculated that the Deathworlders might bring an end to the endless conflict, either by conquering the galaxy and imposing peace, or by wiping out the warring factions altogether. But for most, the unknown was terrifying. Every alien race across the galaxy had experienced their own share of horror, from ancient wars to planetary annihilations. But none had ever faced something as alien, as inexplicable, as the Deathworlders. Days passed, and the fleet of Deathworlders remained in orbit. Not a single shot was fired. There was no show of force, no demand for surrender. The fleet simply hovered, its presence more menacing than any weapon could ever be. It was as though they were waiting for something. Across the galaxy, panic began to spread like wildfire. The once proud empires, which had ruled with iron fists and mighty fleets, now questioned their place in the universe. What if the Deathworlders didn't just want to rule them? They could erase them entirely. What if they had the power to do so? On the planet Chorus, a once neutral world, citizens took to the streets. Some gathered in protest, demanding that their leaders act with strength. Others huddled together in fear, praying that the Deathworlders would pass them by. Governments scrambled to prepare their defense, but deep down, they knew that they were fighting an unknown enemy. There was no strategy to counter what they had never faced before. Back on the capital planet, a decision was finally made. The galaxy would respond. A fleet would be assembled, led by the strongest military minds in the galaxy, to confront the Deathworlders. They would not surrender. They would not bend the knee. It was a risky move, one that could either lead to the galaxy's survival or its complete annihilation. As the decision was made, the quiet in the room seemed deafening. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain. The fate of the galaxy was now in the hands of the Deathworlders, and they had just ignited a war unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The spark of war. The galaxy was teetering on the edge of chaos. Days had turned into weeks since the mysterious fleet of Deathworlders arrived, and still, no one knew their true purpose. The planets had begun to mobilize their forces, gathering fleets, preparing for what was expected to be an inevitable confrontation. The whispers of war grew louder by the hour, and yet there was still no sign that the Deathworlders had any interest in making the first move. Their fleet remained a silent, intimidating shadow over the galaxy. On the capital planet of the Galactic Coalition, tensions reached their breaking point. The Council convened for one final meeting to decide what to do. An overwhelming majority favored direct action. They had to defend their territories, their sovereignty, their way of life. Fear had seeped into every aspect of their decisions, and their response was clear. They would strike first. Admiral Cora, a seasoned veteran of countless battles, stood before the council. Her eyes, usually sharp and unwavering, were clouded with doubt. She had fought in wars that spanned centuries against enemies with fleets and weapons of unimaginable power, but never had she faced an enemy like this. There was no history to study, no data to rely on. They were stepping into the unknown, and every part of her screamed that it was a terrible mistake. "Admiral, what is your recommendation?" one of the council members asked, his voice filled with a mix of urgency and concern. Cora paused for a moment, her hand resting on the table. "We must act with caution. The Deathworlders have shown no signs of aggression, but we cannot afford to wait any longer. Our fleet is ready, and we are prepared to strike if necessary. But we should be ready for anything. If they are as powerful as the rumors suggest, we could lose everything." Her words hung heavily in the air. The council had heard the stories of the Deathworlders, tales of beings capable of surviving on planets so dangerous that even the most advanced species would struggle to survive. The thought that such creatures now stood before them was unsettling. It wasn't just their strength that worried them. It was the unpredictability, the utter unknown of it all. Outside the council chamber, the streets of the capital were filled with unrest. The public had been informed of the situation, and while many stood behind their leaders, there was an undercurrent of fear that rippled through the masses. News networks broadcasted endless speculation, theories, and anxieties about the Deathworlders. Was this a call to arms or an invitation for peace? What were they waiting for? And more importantly, what would happen if the Deathworlders attacked? As the council deliberated, the galactic fleets began to assemble. Massive warships, each a fortress in its own right, prepared for the first-ever confrontation with a force that was unlike any they had faced before. The stars themselves seemed to grow dimmer in the face of this impending war. Meanwhile, deep within the Deathworlders' fleet, something was stirring. The Deathworlders had been watching the galaxy for far longer than anyone realized. They had seen the patterns of galactic politics, the endless wars, the thirst for power. But more than that, they had watched the destruction and devastation that had come from the cycles of conflict. They had watched the fall of empires, the rise of new ones, and the eternal dance of life and death across the stars. Now they had arrived, not to conquer, not to destroy, but to judge. For them, the galaxy was a puzzle, a question they had long sought to answer. Could life, in all its forms, truly survive the chaos of the cosmos? Could the galaxy rise above its endless cycles of violence and war? Or would it perish, consumed by its own hubris and greed? The fleet's commander, a being of unimaginable age and wisdom, stood at the helm of the flagship. His eyes, glowing with an ancient, unfathomable knowledge, scanned the distant stars. He had watched civilizations rise and fall, but never had he seen a species like humanity, so fragile, yet so fiercely determined. The humans, the Deathworlders, were an anomaly in the galactic balance. They were survivors. It was said that they thrived where others would perish, that their strength came not just from their power, but from their will to endure. And that endurance was exactly why the Deathworlders had chosen to awaken them. The humans had been asleep for a reason. It was time to see whether their strength could survive the test of the galaxy's chaotic, unforgiving nature. Would they bend the galaxy's rules to suit their own survival, or would they be swallowed up by the endless cycle of destruction? A decision had been made. It was time to act. On the surface of Melnar 7, the mining colony was a quiet place, far removed from the grand councils and fleets of the galaxy. Yet the tension was palpable. The message from the Deathworlders had reached every corner of the world, and the inhabitants could feel it in their bones. The storm was coming. Inside the colony's central hub, a group of human survivors, men and women who had been awoken from their deep cryosleep, stood ready. They were not the powerful, spacefaring military force that the galaxy was accustomed to. They were the last of humanity, the remnants of a species long believed extinct. But in their veins flowed the blood of those who had conquered the impossible. They were Deathworlders, and they had been summoned to the front lines. As they prepared for what lay ahead, there was no fear in their hearts, only the calm, relentless resolve that had carried them through centuries of struggle. They were humanity's last hope. And now, the galaxy would learn what it truly meant to face the Deathworlders. The countdown to the galaxy's fate had begun. The first strike. The quiet tension in the galaxy had stretched for far too long. The fleets were assembled, each ready for war, but still, the Deathworlders remained silent. Their presence was a constant, an oppressive weight hanging over every faction, every leader. No one knew what they truly wanted or what they would do. Was this a test, a trick, or was something much worse about to unfold? The galactic forces had never felt so unified in purpose, yet so fragile in their determination. A single spark could set off a chain reaction that could engulf the stars in fire. The question wasn't whether a war would start, but when. The Council's decision had been made. The galaxy would strike first. It was a decision driven by fear, desperation, and the looming threat that the Deathworlders could end everything if they were left unchecked. Admiral Cora, once so sure of herself, stood on the bridge of the flagship, her eyes scanning the stars before her. The calm before the storm felt like a slow, inevitable death. The command had been given. They would attack. As her fleet slowly powered up, the ships began to move into formation, ready to move at a moment's notice. Across the galaxy, thousands of warships activated their engines, their weapon systems coming online, their crews preparing for the battle they hoped they would never need to fight. And then, without warning, the first shot was fired. The silence shattered like glass. A single blinding bolt of energy shot across the void, directed not toward the galaxy's fleet, but toward one of their own ships, a smaller, less defensible vessel. The beam ripped through the ship's shields with terrifying ease. It was over in an instant. Admiral Cora's eyes widened. The signal had been clear. The Deathworlders had fired, but not at them. The human fleet had been attacked by an unseen enemy that had struck with deadly precision. But why? What was the purpose of this attack? The Deathworlders' presence grew more ominous with each passing moment. They had shown their power, their ability to strike with unimaginable force. But they weren't attacking outright. Not yet. This was something else, something more subtle. "We need to respond, Admiral," one of the officers on the bridge urged. "They struck first. Now we know they're a threat. It's time to retaliate." Cora nodded grimly, her voice steady, but with a hint of uncertainty. "Prepare the fleet. Return fire. We will make them understand the consequences of attacking us." Across the galaxy, the response was swift. Ships fired back, massive energy beams lashing out at the void. A fierce, chaotic battle began to unfold. The galaxy's fleets came to life, their weapons discharging, their crews scrambling for their positions. But as the first wave of attacks collided, something strange began to happen. The Deathworlders didn't engage the way they expected. Instead of meeting the barrage with force, they simply disappeared. Their ships faded into the background, vanishing into the darkness of space as if they had never existed. Only their energy signatures remained, like ghostly remnants in the distance. Admiral Cora watched in stunned silence. Where did they go? The fleet's sensors were scrambling. No one could track the Deathworlders' movements. The ships were gone, vanished into the blackness of the galaxy. Then came the signal. Across the communications channels, the words echoed in every ship's speakers. It was a voice, strange and yet familiar. It wasn't a language they understood, but somehow the meaning was clear. "You have made your choice." The words sent a chill down Cora's spine. It wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't even a threat. It was something worse. It was an answer to their desperate, reckless attack. A warning, perhaps, or a declaration of judgment. But whatever it wasn't what they had expected. Cora clenched her fists. The question lingered. Had they just sealed their fate? The fleet had fired first, and now they would have to live with the consequences. But they had only scratched the surface of understanding who the Deathworlders truly were. They had shown their power, but the true nature of the Deathworlders was still a mystery. Far from the Galactic Fleet, in the heart of the Deathworlders' flagship, the commander stood before the monitors. His eyes remained fixed on the star systems ahead. The humans had struck first, but the response was clear. The galaxy had made its decision. Now, the Deathworlders would make theirs. "Activate the next phase," the commander ordered. His voice was calm, but there was a deep weight to it. Let them feel the consequences of their actions. The ship's crew moved swiftly, activating a series of systems that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. The Deathworlders weren't just here to fight. They were here to test the galaxy. They weren't concerned with dominating it. They were testing whether the galaxy was ready to face the unimaginable power of those who had survived the harshest of worlds. As the Deathworlders prepared to reveal their true strength, the galaxy's fate rested in the balance. Would the humans and the rest of the galactic fleets survive the oncoming storm? Or would they crumble under the weight of a power they could barely comprehend? The unleashing of power. The silence that followed was chilling. The sudden disappearance of the Deathworlders had left the galaxy's forces in confusion, unsure of how to proceed. Their sensors searched, but nothing was found. No ships, no energy signatures, nothing. It was as though they had never been there at all. The fleet held its position, waiting for any sign of movement, any indication that the Deathworlders had regrouped or were preparing another strike. But the void remained still. Even the most experienced officers were starting to feel the pressure, the unnerving weight of uncertainty. Admiral Cora paced back and forth on the bridge of her flagship, her hands clasped behind her back. She was accustomed to high-stakes situations, but this was different. There was something ominous about the way the Deathworlders had reacted, or rather, the way they hadn't reacted. Then, without warning, the stillness of space shattered. A burst of light appeared in the distance, so bright, so intense, it blinded every ship's sensors for a moment. It was like staring directly into the heart of a dying star. The light slowly dimmed, revealing what lay beyond. Massive warships, unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. These weren't ordinary ships. They seemed to warp space around them, bending the very fabric of reality as they moved. The Deathworlders had returned. The Deathworlder fleet emerged from the darkness, their ships appearing seemingly from nowhere, as though they had slipped between dimensions. The sheer size of the ships alone was enough to instill fear, each vessel dwarfing the largest ships in the galaxy's fleet. But it wasn't just their size that was terrifying. It was the energy emanating from them. The power they radiated was immense. It crackled in the air, like static electricity before a storm, and for the first time, the fleet felt truly helpless. This was no ordinary enemy. This was something far beyond their understanding. On the bridge, Admiral Cora's eyes widened in disbelief. What in the galaxy? Admiral, one of her officers shouted, pointing at the readout on the console. The energy readings are off the charts. We're talking about power levels we've never seen before. These ships, are they even real? Before she could respond, the massive fleet of Deathworlders made their move. One ship, its surface rippling with raw energy, extended a single tendril of light toward the nearest planet, a peaceful world that had just started rebuilding after a long war. The light touched the planet's atmosphere, and in an instant, the entire sky was ablaze with energy. The ground trembled, buildings collapsed, and the planet's surface cracked open, as if the very core of the world was being torn apart. It wasn't an attack. It was a demonstration. The Deathworlders were showing the galaxy what they were capable of, reminding everyone that their power was absolute. The ship retracted the tendril, leaving the planet's surface in ruins, its once thriving cities now nothing but dust and rubble. The galaxy's fleets watched in stunned silence. Some of the bravest officers even flinched, understanding now that they were dealing with something they could never have imagined. The Deathworlders were not here to conquer. They were here to test. Admiral Cora's voice was barely a whisper. We can't fight this. We're not prepared for this level of power. But it wasn't just the Deathworlders' weapons that terrified the galaxy's forces. It was their indifference. The Deathworlders didn't care about the destruction they caused. They didn't care about the fear they instilled. To them, it was all part of a grand plan, a test of the galaxy's strength, its resolve. For a brief moment, the universe seemed to pause. The warships stood still, the energy around them pulsing like a living thing. There was a sense that something deeper was happening, something cosmic. The Deathworlders had made their move, but they were not yet done. Ready the fleet, Admiral Cora ordered, her voice hard with resolve. She knew the galaxy couldn't back down. Not now. Not after seeing the power of the Deathworlders. We have no choice but to fight. The fleet began to prepare for what was sure to be the most intense battle of their lives. Weapons were primed, shields raised. Every ship's crew was on high alert, aware that this could be their last fight. There was no room for error. If they failed, if they didn't stand their ground, The Deathworlders would erase them as easily as they had shattered the planet. But even as the fleet made its final preparations, the Deathworlders' ships remained eerily calm. They weren't rushing in. They weren't attacking immediately. They were watching, waiting, gauging the strength of the galaxy's response. The true test was yet to come. As the galactic forces gathered themselves for what could be their final battle, Admiral Cora couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about survival anymore. The Deathworlders had awakened something within the galaxy's leaders. The fear of defeat was replaced with something else, a desire to prove themselves, to show the Deathworlders that the galaxy wasn't ready to roll over and die. The stage was set. The universe was holding its breath. And somewhere, deep within the Deathworlders' ships, the commanders knew this battle was only the beginning. The real test was about to unfold. The final stand. The galaxy's fate hung in the balance. Every officer, every soldier, and every commander knew that this could be their last battle. The Deathworlders had demonstrated their power in a way that shattered all doubts about their superiority. The devastation they had caused in a matter of moments was a warning. Now, they were poised to deliver the final blow, but they weren't attacking. No, they were waiting, watching, to see if the galaxy could rise to meet them. Admiral Cora stood at the helm of her flagship, the tension in the air so thick it was almost suffocating. The fleet was ready, weapons armed, shields up, and engines primed. Every ship in the fleet was aligned, ready to give everything they had in this final stand. But as the minutes ticked by, a feeling of unease settled over them. The Deathworlders weren't moving. They weren't attacking. What were they waiting for? The answer came in a sudden, overwhelming wave of energy. The Deathworlder ships, which had been eerily still, began to hum with power. The very fabric of space seemed to ripple and twist around them. The galaxy's fleet braced for impact, preparing for the storm that was about to hit. Then, in a move that took everyone by surprise, the Deathworlders sent a message, a single, cryptic transmission, relayed to every ship in the galaxy's fleet. The voice that came through was cold, emotionless, and haunting. "We have seen your strength. We have tested your resolve. Now, the true battle begins." With those chilling words, the Deathworlder fleet moved. It wasn't a simple assault. It was a demonstration of their sheer, unimaginable power. The energy they unleashed wasn't just a weapon. It was an experience. Each ship was cloaked in an aura of blinding light, bending space itself as they tore through the very laws of physics. The galactic fleet opened fire. Missiles and lasers streaked through the void, but they were nothing more than futile sparks against the Deathworlders' overwhelming might. Every shot that hit was absorbed by an impenetrable shield. Every ship that engaged was torn apart without mercy. The sheer scale of the destruction was beyond comprehension. Admiral Cora's ship shook violently as the first blast from a Deathworlder ship hit her flagship. The crew scrambled, trying to assess the damage, but it was clear they were outmatched. The Deathworlders weren't just defeating them, they were erasing them from existence. Cora's mind raced. She had known this battle was going to be difficult, but she had never anticipated this level of power. She had underestimated the Deathworlders' true strength. The galaxy's entire fleet was being obliterated, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. It felt like every strike from the Deathworlders was a reminder that they were the true rulers of the universe. But Cora was not one to give up easily. She had spent her entire career fighting impossible odds, and this would not be her last stand. "Prepare for a counterattack," she shouted, rallying her crew. "We fight until the end. We will not let them erase everything we've worked for." The remaining ships in the galaxy's fleet began to regroup, launching a final, desperate counteroffensive. The Deathworlders, seemingly amused by the futile attempt, didn't bother to dodge. They simply absorbed the attacks, their shields flickering only slightly with each hit. But then, something changed. A new energy signature appeared on the radar. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger by the second. Cora's eyes widened as she recognized what it was. It was another fleet, but this one was different. It wasn't one of the Galaxy ships. It wasn't from any known race. It was the Deathworlders' true army. The new fleet entered the battlefield like a storm. Thousands of ships, all designed to harness the raw power of the Deathworlders' technology, appeared in an instant. They were unlike anything the Galaxy had seen, sleek, dark, and terrifying. Their weapons flared with energy, not just capable of destroying ships, but of bending reality itself. For a moment, the Galaxy's fleet stopped in stunned silence. They had faced an enemy that could rewrite the laws of physics and tear apart entire planets with ease. And now, they were facing something even more terrifying: the full might of the Deathworlders' war machine. Admiral Cora, though shaken, stood resolute. She had no illusions left. The Deathworlders were not invincible. They had come to test the Galaxy, to see if it could rise to meet their challenge. This was not just about survival anymore. This was about proving that the Galaxy could endure, could stand up to even the greatest threats and survive. "Fight," Cora commanded. "Fight like we've never fought before." With that, the last remnants of the Galaxy's fleet charged forward. The final battle was upon them. The universe's fate would be decided in this moment. Would they be wiped from existence, or would they rise up and show the Deathworlders that no matter how overwhelming the odds, the Galaxy would never surrender? The light of the battle shone across the Galaxy, lighting the way for those who still had hope. And though the war was far from over, this moment would live on as the day the Galaxy fought for its life and for its future. The final stand had begun.